If you're enjoying stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and give it a like. It helps a lot. And hey, if you're still awake, you might as well tap that thumb. Now, get comfortable. Let's drift back in time to a place where things were dirtier, louder, and significantly less fair. Welcome to medieval England. Imagine, if you will, that you're not a noble, not a knight, and definitely not a lord of any kind. You're just a guy, or a woman, living in a town that smells like wet hay, pigs, and desperation. The streets are paved with mud and questionable substances. Life is hard, but you've got dreams. Maybe you want to own your own stall at the market. Maybe you just want to not die of dysentery. But then, one day, something goes wrong. You're in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Maybe you mouthed off to the wrong noble, or someone just thinks they saw you steal a loaf of barley bread. And before you know it, the sheriff's got you by the collar, and you're being dragged toward what they call justice. Now, justice in medieval England was less about evidence and more about whether or not the village liked you that day. Trials. Sure. But they usually involved a man in robes mumbling Latin and a crowd full of people who already decided you were guilty because you looked like the kind of person who might commit mild treason. You're thrown into a cell made of stone and iron bars. The air smells like damp moss and, well, regret. They don't even tell you what day you're being hanged. It's just sometime soon. Very soon. But not quite now. That's the medieval twist. It's not the hanging that gets you first. It's the waiting. You start to wonder if the rat in the corner has a name. You name him Fred. He keeps you company. You talk to him more than the guards, because Fred doesn't call you a thief. The food. A crust of bread and something they swear is soup. You're not convinced. And while you sit there with Fred, stewing in anxiety and questionable stew, you begin to hear the sound of wooden hammers outside, the gallows being constructed, slowly, methodically. They say it's not personal, but when they build it right outside your window, it sure feels personal. The trial, if it could truly be called that, was held in what had once been a modest alehouse before someone decided it would make a perfectly fine courtroom. Because nothing screams justice quite like the smell of old beer and the creak of uneven floorboards underfoot. You're brought in, flanked by two guards who seem more interested in the meat pies cooling on the windowsill than you. One of them has a piece of cabbage stuck to his boot, and the other smells like he bathed in cider. If he bathed at all, the room is small. A judge sits at the far end, slumped in a chair that probably wasn't made to hold that much disappointment. His powdered wig is more grey dust than actual curls, and he's busy picking crumbs from his robes like he's not about to decide your fate. The jury is a local sampling of the finest. And by finest, we mean most available townsfolk. There's the butcher, who keeps wiping his bloody hands on his apron. There's the cobbler, who's asleep, snoring gently with his mouth open. And there's old Bess, who once tried to marry a goat, and now swears you turned her milk sour. You clear your throat. No one notices. You try again. This time, the judge waves a hand like he's swatting a fly. Name? He asks without looking up. You tell him. Occupation? Unemployed. You reply honestly. A collective gasp spreads through the room as if you'd confessed to witchcraft. The baker mutters something about layabouts, and old Bess begins shaking her head like she just knew you were trouble. The judge squints. And what is it you've been accused of again? The scribe, who has a feather quill that's balder than a plucked chicken, fumbles with his parchment. Suspicion of theft. Chicken? My lord. The judge narrows his eyes. 1 chicken. You nod. Another dramatic gasp. This time it comes from the jury, the guards, and even the dog in the corner, who's been scratching its ear the whole time. Apparently, poultry crime is a capital offense if it's a slow day. The judge leans forward, resting his hands on the desk, like he's about to announce the outcome of a singing contest. Well then, he says, given the overwhelming evidence, namely, Old Bess's very strong feeling that you look shifty, I pronounce you guilty. You blink. That's it? He nods. The guards are already halfway to you, before you've processed the words. You're led away to the village holding cell, which is just a hole in the ground with a rat for company, and what might have been soup once. And just like that, you're on the path to the gallows. But not yet. Sleep tight, listener. More absurdity and misfortune await in the next part, if you're still awake. So, the trial's over. You're guilty. Of course you are. You always knew the dice were loaded, literally, in your case, since the local judge lost money betting on your alleged rigged dice. Now you find yourself tossed into a cell so grim, so unholy, that calling it a cell is being generous. It's more like a damp stone shoebox, shared by all the worst smells of the Middle Ages. You sit there on a pile of straw that might once have been hay, but now serves as a thriving ecosystem of lice, mold, and ancient prisoner tears. It's cold. Of course it is. The walls are sweating, the floor is squishy, and there's a slow but persistent leak in the ceiling that drips rhythmically onto your left shoulder, like some form of medieval psychological torture. And then there are the rats. Oh, the rats. They're not afraid of you. Why would they be? They're probably listed in the jail's registry as long-time tenants. One of them, let's call him Gregory, has clearly been here longer than the guards. He's missing an eye and drags a chunk of cheese around like it's a royal carriage. He doesn't squeak anymore. He just stares at you like he's judging your life choices. The other prisoners, a charming bunch. To your left is a man who insists he's the rightful heir to the throne of England. He keeps reciting royal decrees in between arguments with the wall. The wall is winning. To your right, a burly fellow with no teeth and a beard that could be declared a fire hazard. His crime: he called the sheriff a goose-faced toadmonger at the market. Now he spends most of his time humming hymns in reverse, and just across the hallway, through the bars, you can see a woman who claims to be a witch. She says she can curse people just by blinking at them. You tried not to make eye contact, but curiosity got the better of you. She blinked. Now your stomach's been making a strange gurgling sound for 2 hours. The smell in here is a combination of boiled socks, wet dog, and something that can only be described as medieval disappointment. The food, if it can be called that. It's a greyish lump, possibly bread, possibly an old sponge, delivered by a guard who looks like he hasn't blinked since the Crusades. Night falls, and with it comes the chorus of snores, groans, whispers, and occasional screams. You learn to sleep with one eye open and one foot ready to kick any rodent attempting a diplomatic mission across your blanket. But you're getting used to it. That's the scary part. Your standards are shifting. You actually felt grateful when they gave you a wooden spoon instead of your hands to eat with today. Progress. In the quietest hours of the night, with Gregory nibbling something in the corner, and the man beside you whispering to his invisible court. You wonder how it came to this, and more importantly, how long they'll make you sit here before they take you to the gallows. You're starting to think they might have forgotten you down here. But then again, you're starting to wish they had. So, Dayhoot knows what in the royal dungeon. Time is a blur now, measured not by clocks, but by how many times the rat choir performs their nightly rendition of Squeak Symphony No. 7 in Mold Minor. You wake up to the familiar scent of despair and fermented cabbage. Breakfast has arrived, a single onion, half rotten, and what might be a piece of bread, but may actually be petrified soap. You eat it anyway. Dignity left you on day 2, right after Gregory the rat ran off with your only sock. And the guards. Oh, they've grown creative. One of them now greets you every morning with a cheery, "Still not hanged yet, eh?" Then chuckles like he's the court jester. You begin to suspect this is his personal highlight of the day. He even brought his nephew once. "Look, boy! A real live condemned man." "Say hello," you waved. The kid cried. You felt weirdly proud. They give you chores now to keep your spirits up. Today you were handed a broom with no bristles and told to sweep the stone floor. You asked what exactly you were supposed to sweep. The answer was, your sins. Inspiring. Your neighbor, the one who hums backwards hymns. He's built a tiny cathedral out of bread crusts. He calls it crumbs. The witch across the hall has started naming the spiders. There's Clarence, Archibald, and the one who stares too long. And then, just when you think things can't get weirder, they decide to give you a priest. For your soul, of course. Because apparently, even though they're going to hang you, they want to make sure you're spiritually ready to die, in the most humiliating way possible. The priest is a lovely old man with 2 teeth, a habit of sneezing into his robes, and a fondness for unsolicited Latin. He offers advice like, "Confess thy sins, lest ye die in a state of mortal ketchup." You're 90% sure he meant sin. But honestly, who knows anymore? At one point he pats you on the shoulder and whispers, "At least you're not being drawn and quartered." Which is the 14th most comforting sentence you've heard this week. They also let a local painter sketch you, because apparently, Gallows Day portraits are all the rage. You tried to look stoic and mysterious. You ended up looking like someone who's unsure if they just sat in something wet. Which, to be fair, you had. At night, your thoughts get strange. You start composing fake letters to the king. "Dear sire, it has come to my attention that I am to be hanged. Might I suggest an alternate punishment? Perhaps a stern talking to or being sent to bed without supper. You consider a prison escape, but realize your escape plan mostly consists of hope someone forgets to lock the door, which they never do. Medieval guards might be smelly, but they're alarmingly thorough. So you wait, and stew, and swat at fleas, and occasionally argue with a particularly smug-looking rat that seems to have claimed squatters' rights to your corner. Because being hanged in medieval England, it's not just the rope, it's the build-up, the slow, meandering journey of indignity, mould, and medieval bureaucracy before they finally walk you to the scaffold and boot your soul into the afterlife. But hey, on the bright side, you now know 17 ways to trap a rat using nothing but a bowl and aggressive eye contact. Progress. Another day, another crusty bucket of something that may or may not be soup. You've given up asking what's in it. If it doesn't move, it's edible. That's the rule now. Your stomach has evolved into a hardened chamber of resignation. You're basically a goat with anxiety. Today, the guards came with a new twist, a bath. Or what they called a bath. They drag you to a back room, where there's a large wooden tub that looks like it last saw action during the Viking invasions. It's filled with a cloudy grey liquid that smells faintly of wet dog and cabbage. Probably because a wet dog and cabbage are in it. "Clean yourself up," says the guard, grinning like he just gifted you a holiday in the south of France. "You'll want to look nice for the crowd, right? Because there's nothing the town loves more than a sparkling clean man twitching on the gallows. It's practically theatre. You step into the water. It's warm, but not pleasantly so. It's the kind of warmth that feels like a slow infection. You sit down, and a small ripple disturbs something living that immediately darts under the surface. You try not to panic or breathe. There's a sponge. It's hard. It's crusted. It might be sentient. You use it anyway. You're not alone in this room. Oh no. Everyone is getting the deluxe hangman's spa treatment today. Next to you, a highwayman is humming an old tune while scrubbing his armpits with what looks like a handful of hay. On your other side, a woman accused of poisoning her fifth husband is calmly filing her nails with a bone fragment. It's unclear whose bone. You don't ask. There's laughter from the guards. Jokes. Betting on who'll cry on the scaffold. You try to ignore them, focusing instead on the lump of what you think used to be soap. It's shaped like a skull. Nice touch. When you're finally clean, they give you new clothes. Well, new is generous. It's more like not currently being worn by a corpse. A rough linen shirt, pants that itch like they're sewn from straw and guilt, and shoes made from what feels like boiled leather. Back in your cell, everything feels surreal. You're cleaner now, technically, but somehow you feel more exposed. You've been treated like filth for so long that cleanliness feels suspicious. Foreign. You miss Gregory the rat. You miss the moldy straw. You even miss the smell. A little. The priest comes again. He asks if you've made peace with your sins. You shrug. I confess to thinking unholy thoughts about mutton once. He nods solemnly, as if that's the worst crime he's heard all week. Later, you overhear the guards talking. They're building the scaffold. Bitter rope trouble, but should be ready by sundown. That'll be a nice show. Always draws a good crowd when it's a local. You're the local. You're the main event. A boy is selling sweetbread outside the prison gates.
Hot treats for a hanging! Best view guaranteed!
Even the baker's in on it. You lie back in the straw and stare at the ceiling. There's a crack in the stone above you shaped like a noose. Charming. Outside, you hear bells. Maybe for someone else. Maybe for you. You've stopped counting the days. You just count breaths now, and wonder how many more. You wake up to silence. Not the comfortable kind. Not the kind that comes with peace or rest. The kind that feels like something's missing, or something's coming. A guard appears at the door. He's not your usual guy. This one has a freshly combed beard, and the kind of face that says, I enjoy rules and lukewarm broth. You've got a visitor, he says, like it's completely normal and not wildly suspicious. You blink. What now? He shrugs and opens the door. You follow him down the corridor, your shackles clinking with every step. You've come to hate that sound. It's like your own personal theme music, and it's never a good theme. Just clang, dry. They sit you down in a room with a crooked wooden table. It smells like damp books and vinegar. And then he enters. A man, robed in what might have once been velvet, but now looks like it's lost a few battles with both time and soup. He carries a satchel full of scrolls, an ink-stained hand, and a wary face. I am Master Tillingham, he says, like it should mean something. Of course you are. You mutter. I'm a scribe, a clerk, and on rare, celestial occasions, I become a temporary legal advocate. You stare. So you're a lawyer? Absolutely not, he says with great offense. I'm a parchment technician with occasional opinions. Now I've read your case. You lean in, hopeful. And he flips a scroll open. It promptly falls apart. Your charges are excessive. Theft, insult to a nobleman, heretical comments about pie, and one incident involving a duck and a bishop's hat. Colorful, I'll give you that. I didn't steal the hat, you say. It landed on me. Gravity. He nods thoughtfully, as if this is the strongest legal defense he's heard all month. I've filed a request for a pardon, on the grounds that your execution would be more troublesome than your existence. That worked. It has a 12% success rate, he says proudly. 18% if the hangman's sick. You sit back. 12%. It's more than zero. It's more than you had this morning. He pats your shoulder and departs, leaving behind a faint trail of ink and hope. Back in your cell, Gregory the rat greets you like nothing has changed. But something has. You stare at the wall, and for the first time in days, you don't imagine yourself dangling from a rope. You imagine standing. Maybe, just maybe, they'll come down the hall and say it was all a mistake. Maybe they'll announce a royal pardon. Maybe the executioner will sprain his ankle. Maybe the rope will snap, and everyone will decide that was divine intervention. It's happened before. Probably. You allow yourself to smile, just slightly, carefully. Because hope in this place is like a candle in the wind, feeble, flickering, and likely to set your hay mattress on fire. Still, you sleep that night with your hands folded, not clenched. You even whisper a little prayer, not because you're particularly religious, but because, hey, 12% is better than nothing. The next morning, you're woken by a bucket of water to the face. Standard. You gasp and blink up at the guard. The regular one this time, with the missing tooth and the permanently sarcastic eyebrows. Still here, then, he grunts, as if you were supposed to have wandered off during the night. You sit up on your straw mat, soaked, shivering, and halfway between furious and hopeful. Any news? You ask. He shrugs. You'll know when they call your name. Or don't. Inspiring. The day drags on like a sermon given by a man who enjoys the sound of his own robes. No footsteps come down the hall. No keys jingle. No one says your name. The scribe's words echo in your head. 12% success rate. That's a 1 in 8 chance. You do the math in your head over and over. You were always bad at math. Now you hate it. The prisoners around you groan and cough and talk to themselves. You try not to listen. But it's hard not to absorb the desperation when it leaks through the walls. One guy thinks he's a chicken. Another's convinced the king is actually just 3 ducks in a robe. You're not sure if they've gone mad or just decided to pass the time creatively. The air smells like mildew, wet wood, and hopelessness. You try to eat the slop they gave you, but your stomach's in knots. So you give most of it to Gregory the rat, who takes it without thanks. He's like a tiny, hairy landlord. Then, footsteps, heavy ones, echoing closer. You leap up, heart pounding. Maybe this is it. Maybe the pardon came through. Maybe Master Tillingham, parchment technician extraordinaire, pulled some strings, bribed the right monk, or just annoyed the officials into letting you go. Keys rattle. A door opens. It's not yours. Down the hall, someone else screams. No, not today! You said Thursday! The guards drag him past. He thrashes and pleads. And the whole time you're just frozen. Because it wasn't you. You weren't the one chosen. Today, and suddenly, hope feels less like a candle, and more like a knife someone's dangling just above your head. You slump back down. You're not saved. But you're not hanged either. You're stuck in the middle, alive, but dangling on the edge of something inevitable. Later that night, you stare up at the ceiling, the stones above lit by the moonlight, sneaking through a slit in the wall. You talk to Gregory, because who else is listening? Maybe the rope will snap, you whisper. He doesn't respond. Obviously. Maybe the executioner will call in sick. Still nothing. Maybe they'll forget about me. You pause. That one actually feels plausible. Morning again. You wake up and the first thing you do, as usual now, is check if you're still breathing. Yup. Chest still going up and down, still in the cell, still not dead. A triumph, really. The guard walks by, whistling. Whistling. You can't decide if that's cruel or just impressively tone deaf. You get up, shake the straw out of your hair, and look around like you're going to discover something new in this 6 by 8 stone box. You won't. There's the scratch you made in the wall yesterday. There's the pile of slop that Gregory didn't finish. And there's the little hatch they shove food through, as if they're feeding something dangerous. Honestly, you might be. Then come the footsteps again, this time slower, heavier. 2 guards. One of them holds a scroll. Your name is read aloud. You stop breathing. Then start again, because passing out would be embarrassingly dramatic. Come with us. You're not shackled, not beaten, just escorted. That's a new one. They lead you not to the yard, not to the gallows, but to the chapel. You think, pardon. Or maybe this is just the spiritual prep session before the rope says hello. The priest is there. He smiles. That smile priests give when they're trying to be gentle about very bad news. You'll be given one more day, he says. Your heart doesn't know whether to rejoice or riot. Is it a pardon? He folds his hands. No, but someone's petitioned the judge again. So your execution is postponed. Postponed. Not cancelled. Like a rain delay for your death. They let you kneel. Say your prayers. You can't think of anything to pray. You ask for peace. You ask for sleep. You ask that the soup tonight at least be warmer than a puddle. Back in your cell, the others want news. You just shake your head. Still breathing. You mutter. One guy claps. Gregory stares, unamused. Probably wondering when you'll drop something edible again. As night falls, you lie back on the stone, the straw poking into your ribs like curious fingers. You start thinking, what if this is just how it is now? A kind of purgatory, where every morning might be the morning, and every night might be your last lie down. And yet, in some sick way, you're getting used to it, not liking it, just adjusting. The gallows still wait, and tomorrow might be the day. But tonight, the only thing hanging is the question mark over your head. The mood has shifted, not dramatically. No thunderclap, no doom bell tolling in the distance, just subtly. The guards don't look at you the same way anymore. Less curiosity, less contempt, just quiet detachment. Like they've stopped wondering if it'll happen, and are now simply waiting for when. Even Gregory, the human raccoon in the next cell, has gone quiet. He usually mumbles and chews on gods. No, what half the day? But now he's just watching you through the bars. Like he's trying to memorize your face. Maybe he's wondering what it'll look like in blue. You get your food. Thinner than usual, as if they're not planning on feeding you for long. And your cell feels colder, even though the weather outside hasn't changed. It's not the cold of stone or air. It's the cold of time running out. You pace more now. You count steps, corners, the splinters on your stool. You think, what do people do with their last week alive? Not that anyone's confirmed the date. But you feel it. It's in the way they look at you when they bring water. In how they say your name without using your eyes. Your thoughts have become oddly productive. For someone scheduled to die. You think about the rope. Not just how it'll feel. You've heard stories. Some say it's instant. Others say it's not. But more than that, you wonder who made it. Some rope maker out there, just twisting fiber into fate and shipping it off with a neat little invoice. One noose, standard length. You wonder if they make special ones for tall people. But anyway, they let you outside for a bit. The sky looks too blue, like it's mocking your situation. You stare at the clouds and wonder if they've ever watched someone dangle. There's a boy in the courtyard sweeping. He doesn't know you're the condemned man. He offers you a smile, and you give him the most dignified half smile you can manage. It almost makes you cry. Not from emotion, from how normal it felt. Later, the priest visits again. He asks if you've made peace with your sins. You try not to laugh. You're still trying to understand your sins. The trial was a mess. The accusations were vague, and your defense consisted mostly of, "I didn't do it," followed by silence and a loud cough from someone in the back. Still, here you are. You ask the priest what death feels like. He doesn't answer directly. He just tells you, it's not the end, just the door. The witch, frankly, sounds like something someone says right before they shove you through the door. You try to write something that night. Something final. You scratch at the wall with a tiny shard of pottery and etch 3 words. Still not ready. That's all. Not ready to die. Not ready to accept it. Not ready to make peace with something you never agreed to in the first place. But time doesn't care if you're ready. And the gallows, they're being tested. Oiled. Checked for rope tension. It's coming. But not just yet. They came for you after the morning slop. 2 guards. One of them with that unfortunate mustache that makes him look like he's constantly smelling spoiled milk. No words. No grim announcements. Just a jangle of keys, the creak of the door, and the universal gesture of, "Come on, condemned guy." Time to do something mildly dehumanizing. You half hoped it was for a pardon. It wasn't. They marched you to a small, dim stone room you hadn't seen before. Tucked somewhere behind the main hallway, where the ceiling leaks and everything smells faintly of boiled wool and regret. And there it was, a stool, a rope, a man with a clipboard. Well, not a clipboard, exactly. More like a rough plank of wood with some parchment nailed to it. The man didn't even look at you when he spoke. He just grunted, "Stand straight." You did. Because what else were you going to do? Make a run for it. Trip over your own shackles and die from irony. He took a bit of rope, looped it lazily over your neck. Not tightening, just testing. You tried not to flinch. You succeeded. Mostly. He squinted at you. Tallish. Lean. Neck average. You stared at him. Thanks. He didn't laugh. He just scribbled something and mumbled. Won't need the thick one then. And just like that, you were being measured for your final accessory. Not a nice hat. Not a fancy cloak. But rope. Good, sturdy, professionally fitted death rope. The man kept muttering to himself, running his fingers along a few different coils. Not too long. Don't want it popping his head off. Not too short either. Don't want him dancing. Dancing. That's what they call it when someone doesn't die right away. When the rope's too short, and you just sort of jig around for a bit, fighting gravity and betrayal. You tried to speak. Something witty. Something sharp. Maybe even brave. What came out was, "Sir, how many of these do you measure a day?" He looked up for the first time. "More than I'd like. Less than the baker." Whatever that meant. Then he nodded to the guards. "He's good. Ready by Thursday." A Thursday. The word thudded into your chest like a stone. As they led you back to your cell, one of the guards actually patted your shoulder. "Don't worry," he said, too cheerfully. "You've got a good neck for it." You didn't respond. Because really, what do you say to that? Back in your cell, you sat down slowly. You ran a hand along your neck, tried to imagine the rope. The weight, the snap, or the lack of one. It didn't feel real. But now it was measured. It was official. You had a rope with your name on it. Probably labeled, Talish, lean, average neck. And then somewhere, a carpenter was hammering together the platform where you'd stand just long enough to stop standing forever. You were trying to sleep. Not because you were tired. Who can really rest with a noose appointment looming? But because dreams were better than the damp stone and iron of your current DA core. That's when you heard him. Fast footsteps, a slight wheeze, a voice. "Oi!" You awake in there. You cracked one eye open. The familiar silhouette loomed at the bars. Coat too big, hat too floppy, shoes looking like they'd lost a duel with a puddle. It was him, the man who promised to see what he could do about your pardon. The man who hadn't been back since. The man who, against all odds, still had all his teeth. You sat up. You're back. He grinned, proud as a drunk rooster. "Course I am!" "Told you I'd help, didn't I?" You stared at him. "So?" His grin faltered a little. "Right. So bit of a hiccup." You narrowed your eyes. A hiccup. He shuffled closer. Went to the scribe's office. Real official. Paperwork. Stamps. You know, proper channels. You waited. He continued. Filled in all the forms. Gave them my pitch. Told them you were, what was it? Oh yes, a mostly decent fellow with a poor sense of timing and a strong chin. Strong chin. They seemed impressed. You sighed. And? He raised a finger, as if this next bit was key. Then I accidentally spilled ink on the pardon request. Bit of a splash. Might have drawn a rude doodle without noticing. A doodle. Was supposed to be a pigeon. Or a duck. Looked more like the Pope doing something illegal. You put your face in your hands. He cleared his throat. They weren't thrilled. One fellow laughed. The judge, not so much. Turns out defacing a pardon request is frowned upon. You looked up. So, I'm still hanging on Thursday. He nodded solemnly. That's the general vibe. Yes. You just stared at him for a moment. He tried a smile. But, look on the bright side. I brought you a snack. He pulled something from his pocket. A sad squished, slightly lent, covered biscuit. You took it. Because at this point, why not? He leaned against the bars. I tried, mate. Really. They just wouldn't hear it. Said the rope's been measured. The name's been logged. And the crowd's already packed their lunch. You chewed quietly. He watched you, unsure what to say. Then added, Still, you've got a better chance than most. You raised an eyebrow. How? He looked around, leaned in, and whispered, You've got me. You blinked. You mean the same you that doodled something obscene on my only chance at a pardon? He paused. Yes. And somehow, despite it all, you almost laughed. Because if this was the man fighting for your life, well, maybe Thursday wasn't such a bad option after all. The hammering started at dawn. Not inside your skull this time, though that had its own steady rhythm, but out in the town square. Wooden beams. iron nails. A scaffold coming to life, like some grim beast stitched together plank by plank. You didn't need to ask what they were building. You already knew. They were building your stage. One of the guards even whistled as he passed your cell. Excited. They've got the carpenter from Brimwell working on it. Man's a real craftsman. Says your gallows'll be the sturdiest he's made all year. You stared at the wall, not offering a reply. Because what does one say to that? Cheers. Hope it doesn't wobble. Later, as the morning light poured through the iron grate, you overheard voices from the street. 2 women were gossiping. Did you hear? The hanging's Thursday. I know. I've already made apple tarts for the kids. They love a good hanging. Suppose we should get there early this time. Last one. All the good spots were taken. You turned your head slowly. People were picnicking your death. There were times you thought maybe, just maybe, you'd go out with dignity. Silent, defiant, stoic. But it's hard to feel noble when you're the opening act for a traveling juggler and someone's selling meat pies shaped like a noose. Even the other prisoners started getting nosy. One neighbor, a raspy man who may or may not have eaten his former cellmate, leaned through the bars and asked, "You nervous?" You shrugged. He grinned. "You'll be fine. Just don't panic when the hood comes down. That's when it gets real, comforting. The worst part, even you started counting the days. 4, 3, 2. They gave you slightly better food, a dry crust, sure. But this one came with a dab of honey. Condemned man's courtesy, they said. You almost laughed. Honey on stale bread. How generous. Maybe next they'd offer you a pillow. You know, for your neck. Then came the final check. The officials ensuring everything was in place. You were asked your full name. Again. You were told what time to be ready. You were even asked, politely, mind you, if you had any last words prepared. You hadn't really thought about it yet. Something clever, defiant, profound, maybe just a deep sigh and, well, this sucks. By nightfall, the streets outside your cell sounded busier. People laughing, drinking, practicing chants, like some kind of parade. You laid down on the stone floor, staring at the ceiling. You were about to become history. But not in the grand statue in the town square kind of way. More like a footnote in someone else's diary. Thursday. Took the kids to the hanging. Lovely weather. Got jam on my shoes. And so, the day arrives. You barely sleep the night before. Not from fear. Though there's a bit of that. But mostly because the guy in the next cell is convinced he's a rooster and crows every 17 minutes without fail. You'd grown used to it over the past few nights, but the dread of morning made every tiny squawk feel like a church bell. A very drunk, confused church bell. The guard comes just after dawn, keys jangling, breath smelling like the owl. He clearly had no business drinking before sunrise. He doesn't speak much, just gestures for you to get up and follow. You do? They don't bother with a wagon or a cart. Just a short march through the village square. People are already gathered. Some with bread, some with children on their shoulders. A woman even sells meat pies from a stall set up nearby. Something about being executed while a man hawks fresh pigeon wrapped in cabbage just makes it feel like a twisted fairground. You glance around. There's the gallows, and oh, it is something. Made from warped old timber that looks like it's been salvaged from a house that gave up living. There's moss growing up one leg, and the staircase to the platform creaks with every step you and the guards take. You get the sense it might collapse before the hanging does the job. The executioner is already there. He's got one of those hoods on, black, slightly too big for his head, and he's leaning casually on the noose like it's a walking cane. He nods at you like a pub mate. You nod back. That's polite. Any last words? The magistrate asks, reading from a scroll with all the seriousness of someone announcing the winner of a turnip growing contest. You think for a second, then grin. Just tell my landlord he can keep the chickens. A few people chuckle in the crowd. Even the executioner snorts. Then comes the rope. Scratchy thick. Smells faintly of horses for some reason. They try to position it around your neck, but the knot's too tight, and the loop too small. The executioner grunts, pulls it back off, fiddles with it, mumbles something about bloody apprentice tied it wrong again, and tries again. It takes 3 attempts. Then the trapdoor gets stuck. You're standing there, feeling ridiculous with a rope around your neck, while the executioner and 2 guards poke at the lever with a stick, trying to get it to move. At one point, someone throws a rock at it from the crowd, and that somehow works. The trapdoor finally creaks. But instead of snapping cleanly, you sort of drop slightly and dangle. Not the instant and merciful kind. More the your shoes swing back and forth like a sad pendulum kind. Turns out they didn't calculate the drop correctly. The rope's too short. Again. You hang there, blinking at the crowd, while the executioner mutters something like, "Third one this month," under his breath. Then someone hauls the rope from above to tighten it. A quick, clumsy jerk. Finally, your vision goes blurry, sound fades, and everything goes dark. You don't even get to haunt anyone dramatically. What a waste. And so that's it. Curtain closed. Audience dispersed. Your body tossed into a shallow grave with 2 other blokes and a half-eaten meat pie. Someone accidentally dropped while cheering. Not exactly the legacy you imagined. You thought death might come with a bit more fanfare. A choir of ghostly trumpets, or maybe the chance to float ominously through the town square and whisper vengeance into the ears of your enemies. But nope, you're just very much dead, with a sore neck, no less. And the world, it keeps spinning. Badly, of course. It's the Middle Ages. Let's take a moment to talk about the people back then. Bless them. Really, they tried their best with what they had, which, admittedly, wasn't much. Hygiene. Optional. Science. Suspicious. Curses. Everywhere. People blamed everything on curses. Your cow dies. Curse. You sneeze more than once in a row. Witchcraft. Your bread doesn't rise. Clearly, your neighbor consorted with the devil. And heaven forbid someone read a book. That's how you ended up accused in the first place. Borrowing a book from a traveling scribe that turned out to be about medicinal herbs. Medicinal herbs. Might as well have signed a pact with Satan himself, according to your village. Oh, and don't even get started on fashion. Wool. So much wool. Everything itched. Tunics that fit like potato sacks and hats that looked like something your grandmother knitted during a thunderstorm out of boredom and rage. And shoes. Imagine walking around in soggy leather flaps that looked like depressed ravioli. That was the style. People back then were either peasants, nobles, clergy, or dead. Mostly dead. And if you weren't dead yet, you were probably working on it. You farmed all day, you prayed half the night, and if you managed to live past 30, people assumed you were immortal and asked if you knew Merlin personally. Medicine was a gamble. A stubbed toe could lead to amputation. A fever, that's demons in your blood. Leeches were the cure-all. Feeling tired? Leeches. Can't see straight? Leeches. Just beheaded? Have you tried leeches? And yet, somehow it all worked. Kind of. People still fell in love, danced at festivals, sang songs about questionable sheep, and carved hearts into trees. That's the funny part about those times. For every miserable detail, the disease, the superstition, the execution schedules posted like party flyers, there were also moments of real, if bizarre, joy. Someone baking their first bread loaf without setting the thatch roof on fire. A village idiot convincing the entire crowd that he could speak to ducks. A child laughing because they found a frog that looked like their Uncle Gerald. Ah, witchcraft. The all-purpose explanation for absolutely everything that went wrong in medieval England. Your crops failed. Witch. Your cow stopped giving milk. Witch. Your left eye twitched during Mass. Witch. You stubbed your toe on a rock and then got diarrhea a day later. That rock. Clearly cursed by a witch. And here's the kicker. You didn't even need to be a witch to be declared one. You just had to be slightly unusual. Maybe you like to walk in the woods a bit too often. Maybe you talked to your cat like it was your best friend. Maybe you had the audacity, the pure hubris, to be a woman over the age of 30 with no husband. That's basically signing your own execution slip. They had a checklist, you know. Not officially, but close enough. Talks to plants. Witch. Owns a black chicken. Witch. Smells like herbs. My TCH. Has a mole in an odd place. Definitely a witch's teat. Which, for those not familiar with medieval nonsense, was allegedly a special nipple the devil used to feed his minions. Yes, that was a real belief. No, we don't know what the devil was feeding them. Probably cursed soup. And once someone whispered witch, that was it. No trial by jury, no innocent until proven guilty. It was more like burn them first. Ask questions never. The trial itself? Oh, a real spectacle of logic and reason. Trial by water was a fan favorite. They'd tie you up and toss you into a river. If you floated, you were a witch, because clearly the water rejected your evil presence. If you sank and drowned, well, oops. At least you died innocent, right? Then there was the pricking test. A man with an exceptionally pointy stick, called a witch finder, would poke you for hours looking for spots that didn't bleed. These were allegedly where Satan branded you. In reality, he just got tired halfway through and poked less aggressively, but boom, witch spot confirmed. Oh! And let's not forget the devil's mark test, where they'd strip you down and inspect every inch of your body for suspicious freckles, birthmarks, or, skin. Because normal human features definite pact with Beelzebub. And then came the sentence. If you were lucky, they'd hang you. If you were unlucky, they'd light you up like a Guy Fawkes effigy and watch you roast on a pile of damp firewood, while some scribe in the corner took notes for the local scroll newsletter, which properly crisped. Village now safe from weather-related misfortunes. Amen. A witch hunting was practically a social event. People brought their kids. Peddlers sold snacks. The local bard wrote songs like, "Oh, there once was a lass with a wart on her chin. She cursed the whole town with a sideways grin. They tied her up high, gave her fire and twigs. Now she's just ashes and very cooked pigs." And the worst part, nobody was safe. Man, woman, child, even the village priest, if he looked a little too friendly with his garden gnome collection. One poor soul, a harmless midwife, got torched because she helped deliver 12 babies in 1 week. Instead of being applauded for her efficiency, people just said, "Too many babies. Must be witchcraft." Another man was accused because he owned too many books. Books, imagine reading being a criminal offense. Which, to be fair, is exactly how you ended up dancing on the gallows earlier. A book about parsley. Truly the devil's herb. So, let this be a reminder. Dear listener, had you lived back then, All it would have taken is someone having a bad dream about you, or your neighbor's goose developing a rash, or you knowing the word calcium, and poof, you're tied to a stake with a crowd chanting, "Burn the wizard." Let's be perfectly clear about something. In medieval England, the bar for hangable offence was, well, somewhere beneath sea level. It wasn't just the murderers, the robbers, or the actual criminals who ended up swinging. Oh, no, friend. The gallows had a full reservation list that included the unlucky, the awkward, and the socially inconvenient. Did you steal a loaf of bread because you were starving? Gallows. Did you insult a noble by accident because your accent made "my lord" sound like mild lard? Gallows. Did you hunt a rabbit on land you didn't know was owned by the crown's cousin's cousin? That rabbit cost you your neck, mate. You see, medieval justice was less fair trial and more roll a die and pray it doesn't come up gallows. They had laws for things you wouldn't even believe were real, like stealing from a fish pond. Not the whole pond, just anything in it. That's right. Swiping one soggy carp, and boom, you're being measured for rope. Or how about cutting down a tree in the king's forest? Even if the tree had already fallen, even if it fell because of a storm, even if the king had never seen the tree in his life and couldn't pick it out in a leafy lineup. Guess what? Still gallows. Swearing during church, gallows. Skipping church, also gallows. Sleeping during church, triple gallows. And maybe a lecture from a bishop who thinks Satan controls dreams. You could be hanged for counterfeiting coins, counterfeiting documents, or even counterfeiting your own family name. One poor bloke pretended to be a Lord something or other to impress a girl, and before he knew it, he was less lord and more corpse on a rope. And let's not forget vagrancy. Being homeless could literally be a death sentence, because nothing screams effective governance like executing people for being too poor to pay taxes on a hovel they don't own. Oh, and here's a fun one: strong suspicion. That was an actual charge, not proof, not evidence, just vibes. Some official would wrinkle his brow at you and say, "He walks a bit odd. Might be a French spy," and bam! You're on a cart heading to the scaffold. They had this little catch, all phrase, 2, felony. Nowadays, that means something fairly serious. Back then, felony could mean anything they didn't like. You whistled at the wrong time. Felony. You wore green on a saint's day associated with blue. Felony. You looked at someone's wife for longer than 3 seconds during May Day dancing. Felony with extra gallows. And, of course, theft was the jackpot crime. Didn't matter what you took. A pig, gallows. A spoon, gallows. A turnip. Yep. Say goodbye to your windpipe. Some poor fellow once got hanged for taking a dead nobleman's boots. The nobleman was already dead, mind you. Not like he was going to waltz off barefoot into the afterlife. But alas, gallows. Another man tried to collect rainwater in a pot that technically stood on royal land. Executed for theft of God's water. Theft of water. Then there were the ones who got executed just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A fight breaks out in the marketplace, and you just happen to be standing near the guy who threw the first punch. Guess who's being accused of unlawful assembly? That's right, you peaceful cabbage purchaser. And if you were accused of anything even remotely related to the king, forget it. Say someone scratched, "King Edward smells like trout," onto a tavern wall, and your name was the only one the scribe could remember that day. Straight to the rope. No time to explain. The rope doesn't negotiate. And here's the best part. There were so many new crimes added so quickly They literally had to create gallows in bulk. Some towns had portable gallows, a kind of medieval IKEA set up where they could hang folks on market day between cheese stalls and eel merchants. Honestly, it's amazing anyone survived long enough to make it past puberty. You had to be equal parts quiet, lucky, invisible, pious, wealthy, unopinionated, and blessed with a face that said, "I'm too boring to kill." Even falling asleep on duty could get you executed. Imagine working 18 hours guarding sheep, nodding off for 5 seconds, and waking up to find a tribunal ready to measure your neck, and then blame you for the sheep having anxiety. In short, why did people end up at the gallows? Because medieval England ran on superstition, panic, ego, and boredom. It didn't matter what you actually did. What mattered was whether someone important thought you had done something inconvenient. Ah, medieval England. That wonderfully confusing era where logic came to die, got resurrected as a peasant, and then died again of plague. It was a time when people thought bathing could kill you, because, you see, washing opened your pores, which obviously allowed bad humors and evil spirits to sneak in like gossip at a church bake sale. So, naturally, the solution was to coat yourself in layers of grime until you smelled like warm goat and regret. That was the healthy option. Doctors, bless them, were less medical professionals and more dice throwers with herbs. Your local barber might offer you a haircut, a leeching, a tooth extraction, and possibly a home exorcism, all in one appointment. He probably shared scissors with the man who cut bacon. People feared comets, left-handed folks, and mirrors after sunset. Cats were agents of the devil, unless you were overrun by rats, in which case the devil was useful. Witches were everywhere, or, more accurately, anyone slightly unusual could be accused of being one. Had a mole, which knew how herbs worked, which laughed at a bad joke, which with terrible social timing. You could get thrown in jail for not attending church, but also for attending the wrong church. And you could get arrested for talking too much in church. It was a religious system based on guessing the correct answer while blindfolded and spinning in a circle. Punishments were performance art, stocks, branding, pillories. And if you really wanted to spice things up, there was always public dunking. You were tied to a saw contraption and dipped into a fetid river until you either confessed to something or developed permanent trench brain. Education, forget it. Literacy was reserved for the nobility, clergy, and about 3 chickens who accidentally pecked the alphabet into the mud. The rest just passed knowledge down the old-fashioned way, via folklore, mistranslation, and grandmothers who told you a sneeze without prayer was a handshake with Satan. And then there was the food. Meat so old it could vote, ale so thick it doubled as soup. Bread made with whatever wasn't nailed down. If you were lucky, you might get a radish. If you were unlucky, the radish might bite back. Travel was an adventure. You didn't just pop down to the next town. No. First, you made peace with your loved ones, gathered a will, dodged highwaymen, prepared to cross at least one cursed bridge, and hoped that your horse didn't die from seeing a loud squirrel. And let's not even talk about marriage. Marrying at 12 wasn't unusual, and marrying your cousin was practically encouraged. If you had all your teeth and a goat, you were prime romantic material. Love was optional. Dowries were mandatory, and nothing said eternal devotion. Like signing your name with an X and promising to share your best bucket. But amidst all this madness, there was one thing everyone could agree on: blame the peasants. If anything went wrong, failed harvest, too much rain, too little rain, someone got a nosebleed on a Wednesday, It was clearly the fault of whoever didn't own land and hadn't smiled in a decade. And yet, somehow, they kept going. Through floods, plagues, bad kings, worse nobles, and really suspicious pies. They toiled, they drank, they prayed, they survived. So let us raise a metaphorical goblet to them. Those brave souls who lived through an age where death was common. Soup was questionable, and justice was a random word shouted by a man in fur. And tonight, as you lie in your warm bed, under clean sheets, with indoor plumbing, and absolutely no threat of being executed for whistling out of key, take a deep breath. Smile, and say, with true and grateful heart, "Thank God I wasn't born in medieval England. Asleep well, you wonderfully lucky modern human. You made it through the Middle Ages, and you didn't even have to smell it. But wait, the medieval judicial system, where fairness was optional, evidence was flexible, and your fate often depended on how well liked your neighbor's cousin's goat was. Justice in this time wasn't so much blind as it was utterly, spectacularly confused. Courts were held in taverns, under trees, or wherever a man with a beard and a scroll decided to sit down and bang his walking stick with authority. You didn't need proof. You needed witnesses, preferably ones who hadn't been bribed by your opponent. Trials could be decided by ordeals, which were less about discovering truth and more about seeing how many ways a human body could be inconvenienced by boiling water or hot irons. If your wounds healed cleanly, you were innocent, and if they didn't, well, sorry. The divine clearly thought you were a menace to society. And then there was trial by combat. Because obviously the best way to determine if someone stole your turnip was to hit them repeatedly with a club, while onlookers shouted bad Latin and ate suspicious meats. Rich people had it easier, of course. They could simply pay a fine, called a bot, or, better yet, find some poor soul to stand in for them. Can't afford a bot. No worries. Peasant, you can always rot in a dungeon so damp it had its own species of mushroom, or maybe be dragged before a justice of the peace, who got his qualifications from knowing the local bishop and remembering 2 laws. And those laws, written in Latin, enforced in Norman French, and interpreted however Sir Yelsalot decided that morning. You could be punished for crimes ranging from theft to looking slightly French during a tense decade. And forget lawyers. Unless you were rich, your defense was your own terrified mumbling, while everyone else waited to see if divine intervention would drop a hilo on your head or a pigeon on your wig. Appeals. Absolutely. Just say a prayer, hope for a royal pardon, or bribe a guy named Harold with a turnip and half a chicken. It was chaos, loosely organized around tradition and fear, held together with parchment, superstition, and the occasional angry mob. And yet, they called it justice. So, the next time you're annoyed by jury duty, just be grateful you live in a time when guilty isn't decided by how quickly you sink in a pond or whether your skin blisters slower than expected. If there was one thing medieval people loved more than bread, goats, and public hangings, it was superstition. The entire age was basically held together with prayer, mouldy relics, and a wildly inaccurate understanding of cause and effect. Stub your toe, probably a curse. Toothache. Goblin. Cow fell over and died. Definitely your neighbor's wife's evil eye. Or maybe a local wood spirit who's annoyed you didn't leave him any barley. Science wasn't exactly a household word. Most explanations for illness, misfortune, or unexpected weather involved either God's wrath, the devil's yoga class, or some vaguely defined bad air that happened to float by at the wrong time. People genuinely believed sneezes could expel demons, that cats were agents of the devils, especially if they were black and happened to blink at the wrong moment. And that garlic taped to your door could ward off everything from plague to gossiping neighbors. Warts, witch, dreams about fish. The moon is angry. Baby born with a birthmark. Clearly the mother looked at something evil while pregnant, possibly a frog, or a man with a limp. You couldn't walk 5 feet in any direction without being accused of invoking ancient pagan magic, just because your bread rose weird. There were charms for everything. Want your crush to notice you. Stick an onion in your shoe, chant 3 Hail Marys, and walk backwards through a churchyard during a full moon. Trying to cure baldness. Boil a hedgehog in vinegar and rub it on your scalp. Yes, this was a real recommendation. Want protection from ghosts? Hang dried weasels above your door and make sure your bed faces east. Who needs common sense when you have grave dirt and holy toenails? And then there were the relics. Sweet mercy, the relics. Every church had a bit of bone, or cloth, or tooth of Saint who knows what, which probably belonged to a dog or a goat, but was sold with divine markup. People travelled for miles to weep over a toe bone that allegedly belonged to someone holy, praying it would cure their gout, fertility problems, or terrible decisions. And if that didn't work, well, there was always leech therapy, because nothing says medical progress like slapping a slimy creature on your forehead and hoping it sucks the evil out of your blood. Superstitions ruled every part of life. If your candle flickered, someone nearby was lying. If your bread didn't rise, sin. If you heard 3 knocks at night, death was coming. Or maybe just an owl with a personal vendetta. You weren't supposed to clip your nails on a Friday, bathe during a thunderstorm, or yawn too loudly in public lest a demon crawl in. Left-handed. Witch. Freckles. Illiterate. Suspicious. Woke up with a weird rash. Obviously a hex. Don't even think about whistling indoors. That's how people got cursed, or worse, ignored at village dances. And the church, naturally, played along. They didn't exactly have a hotline to fact check whether your neighbor actually turned your cow inside out with black magic. So everything got sorted with blessings, fear, or just a good old-fashioned trial by bonfire. Superstition wasn't just belief. It was social glue, a coping mechanism, and a terrifyingly creative way to explain everything people didn't understand, which was, frankly, most things. In a world where nobody knew how plague worked, but everyone believed a basilisk could kill you with eye contact, superstition wasn't silly, it was policy. So yes, the next time your Wi-Fi cuts out or Mercury is in retrograde, just remember, at least you're not being blamed for your neighbor's failed crops because your shadow looked little pointy. A medicine in medieval Europe was about as useful as a fork in a soup shop. Imagine being terribly sick, with a high fever, uncontrollable chills, and boils the size of apples. And then imagine your local physician showing up, wearing a robe that smells of mildew and regret, flipping through a Latin manuscript that hasn't been updated since ancient Rome. Your treatment? Oh, it depends on what kind of moon it is, how hot your feet are, and whether Saturn is in a good mood. Medieval medicine was based on the humor theory. And no, not because it was funny, though it certainly reads like a cosmic joke. The idea was that your body had 4 main fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and if any of those were out of balance, you'd get sick, had a headache, too much blood, depression, too much black bile, sneezing too much. That's your phlegm acting up, clearly. Treatments included bleeding, because obviously the solution to illness is less blood. vomiting often induced with herbs or downright poison, and purging from the other end. You get the idea. It was less doctor visit and more comfortable medieval cleans with a side of terror. Oh, and the tools. They didn't exactly sterilize their instruments. In fact, they probably wiped their knife on their tunic after gutting a fish, then jammed it straight into your abscess. Got a toothache. Time to yank it with metal pliers the size of your fist. Usually without anesthesia, unless you count biting on a stick and screaming into the void as anesthesia. Broken leg. They'd slap some honey and mud on it, mutter a few psalms, and hope it healed before your flesh turned green and fell off. If it did turn green, by the way, they'd just amputate it. No morphine, no antibiotics, just grit, pain, and someone praying loudly nearby. Surgery was done rarely and reluctantly, and often in the same place they butchered pigs. With similar techniques, surgeons were seen as low-class barbers who just happened to know how to use a saw. And yes, barber surgeons were a real thing. They'd cut your hair, bleed you a bit, and maybe remove a festering lump from your back, all in one session. It was a spa day from hell. And let's not forget the charming remedies. Feeling dizzy? Tie a dead mole around your neck. Jaundice? Bathe in wine. Honestly, not the worst suggestion. Got hemorrhoids? Sit on a hot stone. Got anything else? Leeches? Leeches were the aspirin of the medieval age. Doesn't matter what you had. Plague, nosebleed, heartbreak. Slap a leech on it. The logic. If it bleeds, it's healing. These were not evidence-based treatments. These were vibes-based. Herbal medicine was a mixed bag. Some of it worked, sure. Garlic for infection. Mint for stomach aches. But a lot of the prescriptions came straight out of a wizard's fever dream. They'd tell you to drink powdered unicorn horn, spoiler, not a real thing, or mix dried bat, basil, and goat urine to cure a cough. Did it work? Probably not. Did it give you new problems? Almost certainly. Hospitals, if you could call them that, were mostly religious institutions run by monks. And while monks were often literate and genuinely tried to help, their idea of medicine leaned more toward prayer and potions than practical care. Cleanliness wasn't prioritized either, because illness was often seen as divine punishment for sin. So instead of washing your hands, you'd confess. Instead of sanitizing instruments, they'd bless them. Instead of antibiotics, they'd prescribe a pilgrimage. That's right. You have gangrene. Try walking 500 miles to Rome. That should clear it up. A mental illness. Forget it. If you were melancholic, hysterical, or saw visions, people assumed you were possessed, cursed, or worse. A heretic. Treatments involved chaining you up, starving you, or dunking you in freezing water until the demons got bored and left, or until you drowned. Whichever came first. All of this to say, if you ever catch a cold today, look at your tissues, your warm tea, your Tylenol, and be grateful you weren't born in a time when a fever meant. Better boil some frog legs and slap them on your chest while chanting to Saint Tryphon. Your house, or rather, your dirt hut held together by hope and chicken poop. These weren't cozy cottages with roses around the door. They were smoke-filled, drafty boxes with a hole in the roof and livestock sleeping next to you. Yes, next to you. Because animals take warmth. No insulation, no privacy, and definitely no indoor plumbing. You did your business outside. Unless it was cold. Then you'd probably do it in a bucket in the corner and hope nobody knocked it over in the night. Your bed, a straw-stuffed sack crawling with bugs. Your pillow, maybe a folded bit of old cloth. Blankets, if you were lucky. Most people shared bedding too. Not for intimacy, but for heat and survival. And if one person got lice or the plague, well, guess who's sharing now? Now, your job farming. Endless, brutal, back-breaking farming. You didn't own the land. No. That belonged to the Lord. You just worked it. Every day. Sunrise to sunset, unless it was Sunday sometimes. You grew crops not for yourself, but to pay taxes to your Lord, to the church, and to the king. What you kept was barely enough to feed your family, assuming there wasn't a bad harvest, locust swarm, unexpected frost, flood, or war, which happened often. A typical day started before dawn. You drag your sleep, deprived body out of your flea infested bedding, and throw on the same scratchy wool tunic you've been wearing for the past 3 months. You'd feed the animals, fetch water from the stream, which doubled as a bath, laundry and drinking source, and then start your work in the fields. Plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting. Rinse and repeat, though rarely with actual rinsing involved. Meals. Think brown. Everything was brown. Brown bread, brown porridge, brown cabbage stew if you were lucky. Meat, rare. Fruit. Seasonal and scarce. Cheese. Occasionally. Salted fish. Only if it didn't go bad first. You'd eat with your fingers or maybe a wooden spoon. A knife was multi-purpose. Tool, utensil, personal defense. Your beverage of choice. Even for children. Why? Because the water was disgusting. You were probably missing several teeth by age 30, and your body was wrecked from constant labor. Life expectancy. About 30-35 years. And not because people just dropped dead at that age, but because so many died in childhood. If you made it to 50, you were a legend. A 60-year-old peasant was practically Gandalf. Education. Not a chance. If you were literate, you were probably a priest or a noble. Peasants didn't go to school. Your knowledge came from your parents, who got it from their parents, and so on, mainly how to survive, avoid illness, avoid punishment, and maybe how to identify which mushrooms wouldn't kill you. Entertainment, storytelling by firelight, music if someone had an instrument, village festivals maybe, dancing, gossiping about neighbors, watching chickens fight. Yes, that was a thing. Sometimes there'd be a traveling jester, peddler, or miracle healer, and the whole village would turn out like it was a rock concert. Other times, the entertainment came in the form of public punishment, stocks, whippings, maybe even a hanging. Nothing quite says community. Bonding like a crowd of peasants, jeering at a guy with cabbage on his head in the pillory. And let's talk taxes. You were taxed for everything. A portion of your crops, your animals, your labor, your bread, your firewood, your soul. There was the tithe to the church, 10%, your rent to the Lord, and then random fees, like bridge tolls or mill taxes. You had to pay to grind your own grain. Sometimes you even had to work your Lord's land for free, just because. Then there's war. If your local lord decided to pick a fight with another noble, guess who's getting conscripted? That's right. You. With your wooden pitchfork and zero training, you'd be given a rusty dagger and shoved into a line of terrified men just like you. Best case, you come home missing a few fingers. Worst case, they bury you in a shallow trench and reuse your shoes. Speaking of burial, death was everywhere. One bad winter, people starve. One new illness, it sweeps through the village like a broom of doom. The plague. Oh, that's not just a bad flu. That's watching your neighbor die on Monday, his wife by Wednesday, and the whole family buried in a pit by the weekend. Marriage. Practical, not romantic. You married young, had as many children as possible, because many would died, and hoped for a life partner who wouldn't beat you or run off. Women had it even harder. Childbirth was dangerous, rights were minimal, and your life revolved around work, babies, and trying not to die before 35. The church dominated everything. It was your only real source of news, education, moral code, and authority. The priest told you how to live, what to believe, who to fear, and what sins would send you to hell. Heaven was your best hope, because life on earth certainly wasn't doing you any favors. Still, peasants found ways to survive. There was community, simple joys, shared meals, and resilience. People laughed, fell in love, played games, sang songs. And when the workday ended, you'd sit by the fire, drink weak ale, and be thankful that at least you weren't in the pillory with a rotten tomato in your eye socket. Literacy. That was a luxury. Reading and writing were reserved almost exclusively for the clergy, nobles, and monks. If you were a peasant, your education consisted of learning how not to die. Farming, digging, carrying, sewing, birthing, fetching, obeying. And that was your curriculum. Every subject delivered via blisters, bruises, and a back permanently bent before you hit 30. Now, schools did exist, kind of. The earliest formal education was mostly monastic, meaning it took place in monasteries and abbeys, and was run by monks, their students, other monks in training, and the curriculum, Latin. Latin, more Latin, maybe a splash of theology, a dollop of moral philosophy, and a scroll or two about saints getting martyred in creative ways. Reading and writing were tools for copying scripture, not for composing sassy tweets or reading bedtime stories. If your parents had some money but weren't royalty, you might be lucky enough to go to a cathedral school, or later on, a grammar school. These were the elite institutions. Think of them as the Ivy Leagues of the time, except with more plague and fewer snacks. The focus was again Latin, grammar, logic, rhetoric. Not math, not science. Not anything that would teach you how to fix your cartwheel or brew decent beer. Just endless parsing of ancient texts, while praying you don't sneeze and stain. The only book in the room with your plague snot. And if you were a girl, education, please. Unless you were a noblewoman destined for a nunnery. The only letters you'd be seeing were the ones sewn into your husband's tunic. Most girls were taught domestic skills, how to cook, spin wool, raise children, and quietly accept their fate. A noble girl might learn to read, but mostly to read prayer books, or love poems written by some strumming troubadour who couldn't afford socks. Let's talk about teachers. These weren't the passionate, coffee-fueled educators of today. They were usually underpaid clerics who were either deeply pious or deeply bitters, sometimes both. And discipline. Let's just say your behavior was corrected with the kind of beatings that would make a modern therapist spontaneously combust. Didn't memorize your Latin declensions. That's a smack with the rod. Talk during scripture reading. That's another. Dropped ink on your parchment. May God have mercy on your clumsy soul. Textbooks. Rare. Paper was expensive. Most learning was done through oral repetition, and by copying texts by hand. Which sounds romantic until you're on your 5th hour of tracing. In principio erat verbum. By candlelight. Trying not to cry into the ink. Now, let's say you were the top of your class. The real creme de la scroll.
What's next? University!
Yes, medieval universities were a thing. Oxford, Paris, Bologna. All founded in the 12th century. But again, these were places for men, rich men, clerical men, nobility, and the lectures, monotone readings from Aristotle and Aquinas, delivered in Latin. While you sat on a wooden bench, so hard it made your spine beg for death. There were no projectors, no discussion groups, and certainly no coffee. Degrees took years, and once you finished, your job options were become a priest, become a teacher, or continue being very poor, but with better handwriting. medicine and law were available later on. But good luck affording the books or surviving the practice. A medieval law degree involved understanding a legal system that basically went, God will decide if you're guilty when we throw you in a river. Back in the villages, meanwhile, education was almost mythical. The village priest might know a few letters, but even then, sermons were delivered in Latin, a language peasants didn't understand. So they mostly just nodded, hoped for heaven, and returned to ploughing their master's fields. Sometimes traveling scholars or friars would show up to preach or recite poems, but these were novelties. Like a TED Talk, if the speaker was covered in fleas and the topic was how to avoid eternal damnation. And let's not forget the superstitions about education. Some people thought writing was unnatural, dangerous even. Books were seen as magical or suspicious. The written word had power, yes, but too much reading might confuse a man or, heaven forbid, make him question the king. And we couldn't have that, could we? So overall, medieval education was a cocktail of privilege, pain, prayer, and papyrus. If you could write your name, you were a prodigy. If you could recite Latin verses, you were a wizard. And if you could read and write in your local language, well, then you were probably a monk, destined to die surrounded by ink pots and Gregorian chants echoing in the stone halls of your cold monastery. And so, dear listener, now that you know the joyful delights of medieval education, where your greatest academic achievement was not getting hit in the head with a birch stick, I do hope you sleep well tonight. Lie back, close your eyes, and be grateful you're not being woken up at 4 a.m. to recite Latin by candlelight with your nose buried in a sheep hide scroll while Brother Bernard judges your pronunciation. Sleep well. And if you dream of monks, just make sure they're not carrying grammar books.